Yeah, we really underestimate how much emotional pain and trauma and the stories we tell ourselves impact what's manifesting in our bodies.
Today, we're discussing an important topic, a topic that two-thirds of all women will face and are too embarrassed to talk about, according to Prevention Magazine. Men, if you think you should tune out, think again. This issue can affect us as well. Discovering who you really are, your authentic self, can be the most exciting adventure of your life if you have the courage to look deep within, face your fears, and overcome your self-limiting beliefs.
Hi, I'm Casey.
And I'm Andy, and we're on a mission to inspire and guide 1 million people to live a life of purpose, passion, and self-mastery, leveraging the 5 mountains of cutting-edge human development, the physical, mental, emotional, intuitional, and spiritual mountains, to build extreme mental fitness.
Today, we are speaking with Sarah Smith. She specializes in helping women find strength in all stages of motherhood through breathwork, unconventional strength building methods, mindset, and spiritual connection. Sarah focuses on helping women reconnect to their pelvic floors, build muscle, and learn to love doing the dirty work of finding holistic strength. She's a mom of 3 homeschooled boys, has a master's in soil science, and integrates her love for nature and dirt into her training methods with her clients. When not training, she can be found digging in the dirt, doing chores around her farm, and hanging with her English bulldog, Ketabella. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
We are so excited to have you on. And we do break the ice by asking what you're most excited about in your life right now.
Well, what I'm most excited about is that I just launched a new program that I've been working on that's been like percolating in my mind for years. And it's doing the dirty work. So it's called Dirty Strength Foundations of Cultivating Spiritual and Physical Strength. So I literally stacked breath work, strength training, and like meditation and spiritual study. We do things from a biblical perspective. So there's like scripture and stuff all into one training segment. Wow. So yeah, because a lot of people that I work with and women with pelvic floor issues and stuff, they're so busy and they really have a hard time carving out the time to focus on breath work, which you guys obviously really appreciate, which I love. And to me is so fundamental to being balanced in mind and body. And then also, I don't think you can tackle many physical issues in the body without having some kind of spiritual piece to that, because we're spiritual beings. And then strength, and building strength and having strong muscles and tendons and bones and all that stuff, all those things together like are transformative in my opinion. And so I wanted to make it really easy to do all 3 and for people to know that all 3 are essential and can be integrated. So we start training on the 14th. Everyone has all their content and they're getting their, their stuff ready, their gear ready to train. So I'm so pumped about that.
Oh, that is exciting.
That is very exciting. One place we like to go is just finding out what journey our guests have been on and what brought you to where you are now.
Yeah. Okay. That's a fun one. So as you know, my training, I come from a science background. So I worked at the National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute. I did research in environmental microbiology for years, and I ended up earning my master's in soil and agricultural science. So I love science. I love the study of life. I love nature. I love understanding how it all works. And I was always drawn to it, mostly from our perspective of like, how does it impact human health, right? Because we're obviously so impacted by our surroundings. So I like microbiology. I love agriculture and everything, but it all comes back to like, how does it make people feel in their bodies, right?
Right.
And so I did all that. And then I had 3 kids in 5 years. And it's very difficult to work full-time in the sciences. Wow. Yeah. And have a bunch of babies running around. So after the birth of my 3rd, in fact, I defended my master's thesis like 5 days before I gave birth to my 2nd son. Wow. So I was like, yeah. And in soil science, it's funny because it's a very male dominated field. So I'm like in the classes, I'm like breastfeeding a kid through lectures and I'm like always pregnant. And they're like, what is with this lady? Like get a hobby, another hobby. So after the birth of my 3rd son, I was like, I had been an athletic coach when I was younger, and I was training and using fitness to stay balanced mentally and emotionally as the stress of motherhood. And my husband and I had built a business, a family business too, which is eco-sensitive pest control. So our life was kind of stressful, and I found that lifting weights was really helpful. So when I decided I wasn't going to work full-time in science anymore, I decided, I'm like, well, maybe I can be a coach for women. People do that. I knew people that were doing it. So I was like, I'll try it. And so I launched my business, and it was primarily hormonal based fat loss. So it was like helping people to, change their body composition through a balanced way. And it was, a lot of people go to fitness because they want to lose weight, and that's fine. So I liked that. My business was going, my brand was building. I was getting I had a really good community of people I was working with. And then it came to my attention that I had pelvic floor problems, specifically pelvic organ prolapse. We can talk about what that is, and I was devastated because I was, the recommendations when you have pelvic floor issues a lot of times are don't lift, don't do anything strenuous, do a ton of Kegels. And I was even told things like don't walk downhill, don't even lift anything that's more than 5 or 10 pounds. Yeah, it was crazy. And that's only 7 years ago. We've come a long way in a short period of time. So I felt ashamed because my body was not really functioning the way that it was supposed to. Pelvic floor issues, and anyone who's listening has experienced it knows, they can just feel shameful and embarrassing and isolating because there are more people talking about it now, but it's still one of those things. It's a private area of the body. It impacts things like continence and sex and sense of self, so I was like, okay, great. So I work in fitness. I can't do anything now. And I have to pretend like everything's fine and coach my clients, be like, oh yeah, meanwhile, I'm thinking, am I supposed to be doing this, or am I even teaching things that are going to help them prevent the issue that I developed, So after having like a really severe pity party for myself and feeling bad for a long time, I decided I was going to pivot. I decided that I believed in my body. I did think that my body was fundamentally strong. I do believe in God, and I think there's a purpose to things. I was going to figure out what the point is of all this and the way forward. And so I just started to do a deep dive into understanding the body, learning about the pelvic floor, biomechanics. I did pelvic floor physical therapy, as many people do, and I had a bad experience. I do think pelvic floor physical therapists are amazing, but mine was basically like do a bunch of different Kegels, which is just like squeezing your vagina over and over again. Didn't help, shocker. And I just took matters into my own hands. And so it took about a year for me to get really to a place where I was functional and I wasn't having symptoms anymore. And then I decided I was going to brush and dust off all the shame, and I was going to go public, and I was going to say, listen, I have this issue. If you have this issue, I can help you. This should be on everyone's radar, women and men, but particularly women are having babies or menopause. Let's talk about it. And so then my business kind of like became a little bit more pelvic floor, core centric. And throughout my journey, I realized, as I already mentioned, there's a spiritual, there's a mindset, there's a lifestyle piece to it. So now I really focus on the whole spectrum of the things that are going on in our lives that impact our ability to be strong and move in fitness, and then also in life. So.
Right. Oh, thank you for sharing that. And to your point, just so important to address the mental and emotional aspects of what's going on, not just the physical, because no matter how physically fit you are, those issues are always going to come up in some way if they're not dealt with.
Yeah, we really underestimate how much emotional pain and trauma and the stories we tell ourselves impact what's manifesting in our bodies.
Yes.
Simply telling yourself, and I know you guys had Kate Galliette on, and she's brilliant, and changing your story and how you look at your body. If you tell yourself, I'm old, I'm broken, this is just what happens, then that is going to be what happens,
Yes.
And a lot of people are like, this is just what happens when you have babies, which is ridiculous because men and women alike, and women that haven't had babies, a lot of people can have pelvic floor issues. So I thought, I'm like, it has to be something else. It can't just be that I had babies, because people have been having babies for like a really long time,
Right.
and I don't know if you know this, and I know we have evidence that people have had pelvic floor issues historically, but like now it's becoming increasingly more common. And there's very good reasons for that. And some of it is our sense of self, our mindset and emotional pieces. And then some of it is environmental factors and how sedentary we are as a culture too. So, but yeah, it's more than just muscles.
Why don't we just break down that understanding right now? What is the pelvic floor?
Okay, so if you put your hands on your hips and you feel the bones, those like butterflies, right, bones of your pelvis. If you look at the base, is there video with this show? I mean, I know this audience.
Yeah, we'll have clips with video.
So for those who are watching, and I'll describe it pretty good. Here's your pelvis. And then all of this red at the base of the pelvis. So all the muscle that's at the base, if you put your hands on your bones, because you're listening, and you think about, oh, my bones connect. And at the bottom of my body, if I thought of my body as like a can of like Chef Boyardee, right, with legs attached, the bottom of the can, that's your pelvic floor. And you see that here. And it's a complex network of muscles that are moving in all different directions. So they're not just up and down or straight, but there are lots of different orientations to the muscles, and they all work together. They're all integrated to move, and they do it automatically. You can consciously control the pelvic floor, like with Kegels. So a lot of times if people have any pelvic floor issues, a practitioner will be like, oh, you need to do Kegels, because even now, although this is getting better, the mindset and the narrative for a lot of people is that if your pelvic floor isn't working, it must be weak. So a lot of times people are like, I need to strengthen my pelvic floor, but that's not necessarily true. So a lot of times people are told they need to strengthen their pelvic floor by squeezing it. So you can actually squeeze, if you try to think about like squeezing or stop, if you're a woman stopping the flow of pee, if you're a man just kind of like lifting up a little bit and squeezing, you can do that. You can consciously activate and, retract and recruit the muscles there. But the pelvic floor is actually really designed to work automatically. It moves with breath. It turns on automatically before you move your shoulder, before you heel strike when you're running. And so if we're having a problem with it not doing its job, which is to recruit when it needs to be, to create stability in the pelvis, if you think it's the muscles at the base of your hips, when you walk, when you jog, when you climb, when you jump, those muscles will help to stabilize the pelvis. But then they also need to relax, because any muscle that recruits and contracts, it needs to also relax so it can move through its full range of motion. You wouldn't walk around with your biceps like, flex all the time.
Always
right?
in gun mode.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm always there. It's like, well, you can't use it. It's not ready for you, right? So you need to like move it for its full range of motion. Pelvic floor is the same thing, which is why it's a problem that a lot of people, when they have issues, are told to just tighten it more. Because interestingly enough, if you're lacking stability in the body, either because of what's going on in your feet or because of how you breathe and everything, your pelvic floor will turn on and try and artificially create that stability for you and create a lot of tension. So for somebody that already has tension in recruitment, you don't want to tell them to keep pulling and squeezing. And so, and stop me if I'm going too much, but, and so with that, one of my favorite things about the pelvic floor is that when you inhale, when you're doing like good diaphragmatic breathing, where your tongue's on the roof of your mouth and you're breathing through the nose, and your thoracic diaphragm, which is the muscle at the base of your rib cage, is moving down to make room in your lungs for you to breathe. My microphone. And you create compression in the body, because in the abdomen, if you think of what's in your abdomen, there's like liver and stomach and intestines and spleen. There's a lot of stuff jammed in this one area, right? So the thoracic diaphragm comes down and puts pressure on that, which actually feels good on your organs. It helps digestion, it helps to massage. But the pelvic floor, which is the diaphragm right below, like directly below, underneath all that stuff, has to relax to accommodate for that increase in pressure. And so this little dance that we do all day long, which is like inhale down, exhale up, kind of like a piston, creates stability in the body. It creates stability around your back and supports your spine, because when the downward pressure makes the torso turgid and like really stable and strong, kind of like a balloon. If you push it on a balloon and you push on it, then it gets more firm, right? And then when it comes up, there's contraction and there's recruitment of muscles that also helps to create stability. So your body knows how to be stable. Your pelvic floor and your thoracic diaphragm talk and do a really good job of keeping you strong and stabilize the torso so that everything attached to it can move. So you can have mobile hips, mobile shoulders, and all that sort of thing. But because people don't breathe, particularly if they've been in a state of anxiety for a really long time, we get into that fight or flight pattern of breathing. Because people sit a lot, because of just a number of different things, folks lose connection to their breath, they change the alignment of their body, and they lose connection to both their pelvic floor and the diaphragm. So they're really integral for having core strength and keeping you stable, but there's a lot of ways in which that can go wrong because it's obviously complex. So
wow, it's just fascinating to me, the number of things affected and influenced by just the subconscious act of breathing.
I mean, it's one of the single most powerful things I think you can do for everything in your life, right? It changes your mood, it changes your perspective, it makes you sleep better, it makes digestion better. People, when they're stuck in that pattern of fight or flight breathing, it changes forgive me if I'm telling you stuff you already know, but it changes the biochemistry. It actually makes our system more acidic. And so then our muscles are twitchier, which is good because in an emergency, you want like quick response, right?
Mhm.
But twitchy or intense is not how you really want to live. It exacerbates pain. It doesn't really put us and our body in a teachable state. So we're always like reacting to life rather than responding to life, right? And so, breath work is just like, I mean, for my crude explanation, you can see if you're breathing really well, you're going to be massaging all that stuff that's in your abdomen. So your digestion is going to be better. Fertility is usually better. Reproduction is better. You can drain lymph more effectively when you have that movement, simply just from having your thoracic diaphragm move up and down in connection with the pelvic floor and not sucking your belly in. Sucking your belly in will restrict this process, which a lot of people do.
So Sarah, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but would you describe what that fight or flight breathing looks like so people can be aware of when they're engaging in it? We can bring awareness to that.
Yeah, so there's a few different ways to know that you're doing that. Typically, that's going to be a mouth breath. So you're going to be breathing a lot through your mouth. So you can either notice, like if you're not talking or eating, is your mouth shut or do you walk around with your mouth open? Some folks are better just because of social pressures of keeping their mouths open during the day, but they'll wake up with a really dry throat because they mouth breathe at night. And the interesting thing is that if the tongue rests on the bottom of your mouth, if that's your default place, then that usually coincides with mouth breathing both during the day and the night. And so when you're in the more fight or flight breath, you're typically breathing up into your chest. A lot of times people have like neck and shoulder stiffness, tightness. If you feel around at the base of your rib cage and you feel like tenderness on the right-hand side, which is where your liver is and your diaphragm are attached with the falciform ligament, there's usually a tightness and a restriction there because you're not used to your diaphragm moving up and down because you're doing the fight or flight breath that's like more up into your chest. And so the diaphragm's not moving through its full range of motion, so it gets stuck. So those are some indicators of that. A dry throat, a lot of times, people that struggle with reflux and heartburn don't realize when they eat and when they talk, they're sucking in a lot of air because they're breathing through their mouth. And so all of these can be indications that you're doing more fight or flight breathing. And then finally, if when you try to breathe through your nose, it's really difficult for you and it's anxiety producing a little bit, you're like, I can't get a full breath, then that's usually an indication that your default is your mouth breathing. But the good news is I was a mouth breather for years. It is something you can conquer and you can change.
Yeah, amen. Awesome. Thank you for that description. And maybe just for a quick polarity here is what does correct breathing look like?
When I think about energy and vitality, I think about a kid. They have the energy to play, run around, climb things. That energy that feels like you just can't contain yourself. It's the stuff we've always wished they could just bottle up and sell to us, right? Well, this company's found a way to do just that. Amari's Happy Juice Pack. Mood, motivation, energy, things our bodies can naturally produce when both our guts and our brains are happy and communicating. And we can actually improve that process of communication across the axis of the gut and the brain. This is cutting-edge science. This is game-changing information. This is where science meets soul. This is Amari, and we're helping people feel better naturally. Check out the links in the show notes for discounts and more information.
Yeah, so optimal breathing is you're breathing through your nose. Some people say that you're breathing in and out of your nose. I mean, if you're calm and you're just doing work and stuff, like yeah, it's ideal that you can do all your breathing with your mouth shut. But I think a good quality exhale is nice. And sometimes we really need to just like blow out all that CO2. There are people that are prone to being better at inhaling and not good at exhaling. So they're actually always in kind of an expanded state. And then there are other people that exhale more but don't get as full of an inhale, and so there can be a little bit deflated, sort of like compressed in some ways too. So but the best, if you're nasal breathing, your tongue is resting on the roof of your mouth, you're breathing through your nose, and your entire torso is going to expand. So your rib cage will expand 360 degrees, and your middle will soften too, because like I said, when the thoracic diaphragm needs to come down, it creates an increase in pressure, and the pelvic floor graciously relaxes downward too. But the belly, if the belly is sucked in, as fitness often teaches people to do, or if people have overdeveloped abs or they clench and hold their stomach, I used to just hold my anxiety and stress in my belly a lot. That will restrict your breath too. So if you're doing nasal breathing, it signals to the diaphragm to come down. And if you might have to practice softening your belly, but it will feel just a little bit more gentle, a little bit more downward and expansive. The whole, like back to the Chef Boyardee canister idea, there's an expansion of the whole torso. Even your glutes, if you're getting really good expansion, your glutes will lengthen when you inhale, which is like your tail moves when you inhale too. So
moving back to the pelvic floor area, why is it so important to talk about this?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So there's a few different reasons. On the mechanic side of things, the pelvic floor is really impactful because it helps to create stability in the torso, right? So if your pelvic floor isn't, moving through its full range of motion, being able to do its job automatically to stabilize not just the pelvis, but also to adequately support the organs inside, then your movement mechanics are going to get off and someone else is going to have to pick up the slack. So you're going to have back pain a lot of times, you can have knee pain, hip issues. Hip replacements can often be related to dysfunction of the pelvic floor, even shoulders. I mean, anything you think about the base, if you think about a house, right? And if the foundation is rocky, everything built above it or even just like tangential to it is going to be impacted right by that. So if you want to be safely moving, whatever it is you like to do, hiking, biking, I don't know about swimming so much, probably, but of course, breathing is really important with swimming. And if the pelvis isn't underneath your torso properly and you don't have that connection with the diaphragm and the pelvic floor, your breath is not as efficient. But most movement that you do, like you need your pelvic floor to be adequately providing stability, but not holding too much tightness so that everything around it is free to be mobile. And the pelvic floor also provides shock absorption. So if you jump and you want your pelvic organs, which are if you're a female, you have uterus, male bladder and rectum, everyone has, you want your pelvic floor to absorb shock when those organs like bounce up against it and protect them and keep them safe and everything. So that on the mechanic side, it can be far reaching. And then also the pelvic floor, my friend Tim Anderson says it's where all the action is, right? So like sex, okay, is going to be impacted. If you have over recruitment of the pelvic floor, meaning you're holding too much tightness and tension, you can't relax it, so you can't access it. Males will deal with incontinence issues, both like fecal and urine, performance issues, so erectile dysfunction or like inability to control climax. It can be painful. I've worked with men before. It's just like really painful for them to have any intercourse. And then also just like pain, pelvic spasms for no reason, which I've definitely encountered with people. And then there's constipation. Anyone can deal with constipation because if you have tightness in the posterior of the pelvic floor, then the rectum can't really adequately open and you can't relax the way that you need to for stool to come out. So like a lot of times people find they have to push down, apply a lot of pressure to go to the bathroom. Which, is no bueno and can cause prolapse of the rectum over time. Incontinence issues for females, pain during intercourse, a lot of bladder irritation and people feeling like they need to go to the bathroom all of the time or that burning sensation. There's an overlap between dysfunctions of the pelvic floor, and interstitial cystitis, which is like an inflammation of the tissue in the bladder. What else? Anything else? I mean, yeah. So you can see that like these are issues that can really impact your quality of life, right? You cannot have confidence in your body because you don't know if you're going to pee or, you know, like poop, you know, and if people do,
Right.
and they lose control, or because they can't go when they want to, they also don't trust their bodies. You don't feel good or comfortable or sexy or, you know, in intimate situations. And then just the discomfort of like pain and spasms, you know, that people can have. A really tight pelvic floor can also create, because you can't eliminate regularly, then if you're not pooping regularly, then you're not getting out expired hormones and toxins, and then that goes back up into the intestines, gets back into the flow of into circulation, and can create gut health issues. And gut health and pelvic floor issues play off each other quite a bit. So yeah, so it's like your quality of life like can really stink. And people that are dealing with this stuff, they're suffering in silence, and it is keeping them from living their best life, finding solutions, and doing things that are good for them. You know, a lot of times like getting out and being social and being in relationships and exercising and moving, like it's holding people back from doing things they need to be doing.
Wow, it's just incredible to me that so many issues, that all the issues pretty much that you just talked about are things that normally you just need to change your diet, or you know, change your lifestyle as far as your eating habits or your stress levels, or but it's just amazing to me that, I mean, us doing the research for this show was a lot of probably the first time we'd heard a lot about this, even as a female. I mean, this is some of the first time that I've heard this just put so bluntly and in a way that just connects everything to how important it is.
Yeah. When I teach about the pelvic floor and in my digital courses, I always talk about the 3 M's, and the 3 M's are mechanics, which is movement and breathing mechanics, metabolism, which I've now kind of expanded to metabolism and microbes or microbiome, because it's like, it's how your body converts food into energy. And that's both metabolism of us, but then also metabolism of the microbes in our gut. And then mindset, you know, so all three of these things are really working together to cause pelvic floor issues and need to be addressed to resolve pelvic floor issues. If you can, maybe one of them is your big rock. A lot of people, it's like, okay, well, I get my pelvis in a more optimal position. It's under my body rather than tipping forward. I start to feel better. But a lot of times, like, well, why did you get there? Well, there was a breathing piece. Okay, well, why did your breath get dysregulated? Well, I've dealt with this traumatic issue, or I have anxiety, or I have struggled to set boundaries in relationships, and that makes me, you know, nervous and puts me into fight or flight. I'm like, okay, so then there's a mindset piece. It's you pretty much have to tackle all three. But yeah, you're right. A lot of times these issues that are pelvic floor issues, people will like, well, just change your lifestyle, change your diet. And the diet can be a piece because that impacts metabolism. It does impact the microbiome, but it's rare that it's just one of those three. I feel like every time I've worked with anyone, I've worked with a lot of people at this point, it's some piece of all three of those categories. So.
Right. And I might be jumping ahead a little here, but I know you mentioned somewhere that the pelvic is also the place where we store a lot of emotions or undealt with trauma and issues. And how does that work? Can you go into that a little bit as well?
Yeah, so I mean, this is like, I don't know that there's a lot of science to support it, but it's a little woo-woo, but I definitely for sure see it. So you have a number of transverse. So basically everything in the body runs north to south, right? Like blood, like arteries and veins, your nerves, a lot of things, like you eat food, it goes down, right? Blood is circulated in a circle where it's going up and down. And then you have these transverse diaphragms that run. Some people think there's 8 diaphragms. In osteopathic medicine, they typically say like 5 diaphragms. You have diaphragms like in your head. And basically it's just a diaphragm is like tissue that moves when you breathe to accommodate the movement of fluid in the body. So we have diaphragm in the head, in the cranium, diaphragm here, thoracic diaphragm, and then the pelvic floor, and then maybe one other one in the thoracic, depends on who you talk to. But basically this idea of like these there are these hammocks that are running throughout the body periodically. And because they run the opposite of what everything else does, a lot of people believe, and I truly believe this, that they catch unresolved issues, right? And health issues, a lot of times we like to think just in terms of, I got a disease and it was caused by this pathogen and that's why I'm sick. But why were you weak enough that you couldn't fight the pathogen? Was your body protecting itself in this one part? Why was this kind of toxicity allowed to fester in this part of the body? And often it's because we've shut down, we've closed off in some way. And Chinese medicine is like rooted in that. And they've been treating pelvic floor issues since the Yin dynasty. So I think they know what they're talking about, right? Like, so lungs, right? If you have lung issues, there's often there's a grief piece to that, right? And so the pelvic floor is the bottom. It's the bottom, hammock that's running parallel or transverse, right, to the body. And so I think if you had something go on, or I see things that go on in our head or things that we can't vocalize and say for ourselves, if we struggle to breathe, to catch our breath and to feel calm and to be in the parasympathetic and control our breath, all of these issues, all these different traumas, eventually, if we don't resolve them in the places where they occur, they get caught. They get caught in the pelvic floor. And a lot of people that are struggling with pelvic floor issues, they have some unresolved issue. I've never come across somebody that wasn't the case. If we go deep enough, we're like, and it always comes out like they're struggling in a relationship, they're struggling in their marriage, there's something happened to them in the birthing process, something happened to them whenever. And all of us have some kind of trauma. We're human beings, right? We live in community with other human beings that sometimes hurt us on purpose and sometimes do it unwittingly. So the pelvic floor is just kind of like the last catch. And so anything that you don't deal with in the body, in the mind, in the heart, in the voice, it gets caught there and it will stay there pretty much until you start doing the work to resolve it.
It's interesting to me as you're describing this, and for those who aren't watching, you're touching different parts of your head, your throat, your heart. Those also would seem to align with the chakras.
Yeah, which I think there's a lot of overlap with because chakras and like Ayurvedic medicine are, and Chinese medicine, it just seems like they came to the same conclusions just from slightly different ways. So yeah, right. I believe it.
So we've talked a lot about the pelvic floor. You had briefly touched on organ prolapse. If you wouldn't mind going into that as kind of the worst case scenario of a pelvic floor dysfunction. So
most people that struggle with pelvic floor issues are going to have one of two problems that it becomes really noticeable to them. It's which we already talked about, the over recruitment, it's the overusing the pelvic floor. And then downstream from that, or somewhat unrelated, I think it's typically related. So you have a pelvic floor that's not moving through its full range of motion. It's kind of stuck. It's not providing the shock absorption it needs to in your muscles. It's not giving, it's not relaxing, right? And so I talked about with over recruitment of the pelvic floor, if it's too tight and somebody is just trying to do a normal thing, like go to the bathroom every day, you're having to put a ton of pressure for things to come out. And so that can lead to the rectum. You're pushing down, and we're strong, pushing down the rectum, and there's no give. And so now the rectum can be like, the body's going to find a way. So it can move. It can either come out, which, is unpleasant, but it can, if you're a female, it can prolapse into the vaginal canal. It can actually like fall up against the wall of the vagina. And so this can happen a lot in and around childbirth, because obviously there's a lot of pressure if you're having vaginal birth. Even if somebody has a C-section, if they labored and if they were pushing and then went to the C-section, it doesn't mean that they didn't push down on their organs. And oftentimes this can mean, if it's really hard and you're doing a lot of pushing in labor, it can mean that you don't know how to relax your pelvic floor. There's no give, there's no relaxation. Unfortunately, with all the birthing classes people do and everything, it doesn't always help them to get in touch with their pelvic floor and really move both the thoracic diaphragm and the pelvic diaphragm, which is another word for the pelvic floor, through their full range of motion. So then now they're pushing a 7, 8, 9 pound baby up against something that is like no give. And the uterus pushes the baby out, the cervix dilates, like they're doing their job. And then your pelvic floor is like, nope, you're not coming out, And so what can happen with that is that because of all the pushing, or if people don't rest properly after they've had, after they've given birth, or if there were forceps and vacuum suction intervention and things like that. And even tearing of the pelvic tissue and tearing in the vagina, or like the episiotomy where they actually cut to make the baby come out. Changing the structure of the pelvic floor can compromise the support for the pelvic organs. And so then a lot of times people will find out after the fact that one or more of their organs move. So the rectum can move, can cave into the vaginal canal. The bladder can kind of fall backwards. It's usually like more forward to the front of the pelvis, but it can fall into the vaginal canal. And then the uterus can come down too. And so, yeah, so that's prolapse organs. And there's different degrees of that. You can have like, a grade 1, which is pretty minor, grade 2, which is okay, 3, 4, and then all the way like 4 and 5 is like outside of the body. There's different grade systems in the world. The US is different than whatever. But if you can see the organ, you're kind of like, this isn't right,
Right.
I don't think this should be happening. And so that's prolapse. And like I said, I really see that happens oftentimes because people cannot they can't adequately relax the pelvic floor so that they can't recruit it. And interestingly enough, I've worked with people that just by teaching them better breath work, even though that they were diagnosed with like a grade 2 or grade 3 pelvic organ prolapse, it will improve dramatically just from the breath work. And we haven't even done anything else because it's just getting the pelvic floor. Like the pelvic floor was so tight and recruited and not moving, and then the organ prolapsed against it and is pushed up. And so just by getting this pelvic floor to move up and down a little bit, their symptoms, the discomfort can go away. They're calming their biochemistry. They're not as twitchy and tense anymore. So any pain that was associated with the organ being like shifted out of place can be helpful. But it's pretty common. I mean, it's like 50% of women that give birth vaginally have some degree of clinical prolapse. What it comes down to is how severe is it, and how, and how, like, what am I trying to say? Like, what are you doing about it really is what it comes down to too. So it's a whole rabbit trail because there's so much that goes into like why we're dealing with this more. There's evidence. Dr. Stephanie Seneff is a scientist from MIT, and I have a podcast. She came on my show. And she has shown, and she wrote a whole book about it, that Roundup, which is glyphosate, is changing how our body makes collagen. And there's a ton of collagen in the pelvic floor. And type 2 collagen, to be specific, has a lot of the amino acid glycine in it. And glyphosate substitutes for glycine. So when you're eating food that's been sprayed with glyphosate or you get exposed to it, it's changing your collagen, which is going to definitely make the integrity of the pelvic floor change as well. So some interesting things happening in the world today that like could be leading to why this has become more of a problem,
Wow. Before I move on to my next question, what's the name of your podcast so our listeners can find it?
Yeah, it's called Dirty Strength Radio.
That's right. Dirty Strength Radio. How did you come across that name?
Yeah. So it was funny. I got diagnosed with prolapse, and they were like, don't lift anything. And I was like, okay. So I tried that for a little while, and that didn't really work. So I had kettlebells, and I love kettlebells. So I started trying to lift and do some stuff. And I got to a point where I didn't have any symptoms. Like I was kind of resolving the prolapse on my own with the breath work and the movement I was doing, the body awareness. And I really wanted to go get my RKC, my Russian kettlebell certification. And that's like a 2 or 3 day, like really hard program. And people train really hard for it. I knew I couldn't do the training that was prescribed. A, I couldn't afford the heavy kettlebells that people are using. And B, I was like, I can't do that. My body's not ready for it. So I was coming up with alternative ways to train. And one of the things I would do is just stuff in the yard. So I would be like pushing wheelbarrows of dirt around and moving stuff around, and just was getting strong just from doing different things. And we live on like a small farm, so we're always doing stuff, my husband and I. And so we were talking about, like, one day we were like, we didn't have technical functional, we weren't like perfect, we didn't have good technique, but we were saying like, oh, but you have dirty strength, like, because you've been doing all this dirty work, so you're strong. And I was like, yes, that's what it is, so we just started using the term dirty strength. And I was like, that's what I want my show to be about, and then it means a bunch of different things. I think doing the dirty work to like actually be strong, which is more than just like, I go to the gym 5 days a week. And, so yeah. So, but it definitely comes from like doing the dirty work to do hard things so that you're strong in life when you need to be. So
wonderful. Go ahead, Casey.
Oh, no, I was just saying.
Okay.
Which I love that.
Pelvic floor dysfunction and prolapse. I mean, I can see how physically, mentally, emotionally, this can become very overwhelming. Where does one start to begin to address the issues and strengthen?
yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the best places to start is the breath, because it's very affordable. In fact, I have a free digital course on it, but you can buy like James Nestor's breath. You can get some, I wouldn't go into like Wim Hof yet, even though I do love his stuff, because I think people just need to learn how to breathe normally. But there's lots of free breath stuff out there, right? But I have a free course. It's called Better Than Kegels, and just learning how to breathe through the nose and relax. You're not going to make a really good decision about what to do next if you're doing it in a state of panic anyways, right? If you're doing it in a state of hopelessness, if you're just like angry at your body, which most people, when it comes to their attention, they have pelvic floor issues, like they're mad. Like, why didn't anyone tell me about this? Why is my body letting me down? Why can't I do things anymore? And so I think one of the best things you can do is just simply start with breath work. I did not believe in breath work. I thought it was hokey. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, like I know, well, I'm supposed to meditate, sure, whatever, like I just want to do the hard stuff. But once I really buckled down and I spent time doing it, I couldn't believe how impactful it was. So I think that's the first step. And then you have to decide based on your budget and your issues if you need to see a pelvic floor physical therapist. It can be helpful to have somebody look at you and see like what is going on. And there are pelvic floor PTs that work with both men and women. And I would say they're typically very supportive, and a good one isn't going to just look at the pelvic floor, but what else is going on? Like, can you use your glutes? What's up with your gait pattern? Is there any asymmetry in the spine? They'll talk to you about breath work as well. So those would be my starting places for sure. But I think the biggest thing is when people realize they feel it or experience this, don't go it alone. You need somebody to talk to, and you need somebody to normalize your experience and to feel like there's hope, and that's often, I think, I have digital courses that teach people how to get over or conquer their pelvic floor issues. But honestly, I think the biggest thing for people is to get on a call or see me talking about it and be like, okay, I'm not alone. I can conquer this. This person is telling me like, not only that this is an issue people deal with, but I think in some ways it's a blessing, because if you're not breathing well and you don't have really good digestion, if you have bad biomechanics, and bad's a harsh way of putting it, but like, suboptimal, you're going to have other health issues anyways.
Right.
Like I tell people all the time, what's downstream from pelvic organ prolapse is serious things like autoimmune disease, potentially cancer, like other chronic diseases, because those things come about because you have a disrupted gut microbiome, because you're not breathing and you're living with a crazy amount of stress all the time, because your body isn't aligned properly. And then you end up having to have surgery and a hip replacement for something that would have been simple if someone just taught you how to use your hamstrings, like it's inconvenient and everything. And I think a lot of ways a product of modern life, but I started to see it as almost like my body lovingly being like, you gotta stop, you have work to do. And I did not have a healthy relationship with exercise. I had gut health issues. I was a mouth breather. I needed to resolve these things. My quality of life is much better now for having resolved it. And it took prolapse for me to deal with it. But what are you going to do? Sometimes if it's not a severe message, like a glowing neon sign saying you must resolve this, are you ever going to do it? You're not, so. So yeah, but I would say don't go alone. Start with your breath. Pelvic floor PT. Acupuncturists can be amazing too. Like I said, Chinese have been treating prolapse for a really long time and pelvic floor issues. Some chiropractors are really knowledgeable, and of course they can reach out to me. And if I can't help them, I'll point them in a direction of someone that can.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that as a great starting point for folks. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into a couple aspects here of how you help folks. And I think we've touched on probably a little bit surface level of each one of these, but I'm going to ask if you could go just a little bit deeper, mind, soul, and heart, and how that relates.
Yeah, so I think on the mind side, helping people change their relationship, both with their bodies and with exercise, and how they mentally think about their mindset of their expectations, I think is a huge piece, because a lot of people are like, I have pelvic floor issues. I want to fix it so I can get back to beating up on my body. You're like, no, that's not how it's going to work. You're here in this class because you were pushing too hard. You were making withdrawals all the time and you weren't depositing. Exercise is your only form of self-care. And movement is great. And I love movement and it's wonderful, but we don't always have to be pushing hard on our bodies to feel good. And that's the only way we find ourselves. Like, we need to come up with other things. So I think on the mindset side, really helping people to cultivate a lifestyle where they're valuing things like breathing, because breathing is movement. There's a lot of movement that goes on. Like I said, your glutes are moving, your tailbone is moving, your pelvic floor is moving, your diaphragm is moving, you're moving lymph and blood flow. Like, breathing is movement. Intentional breath work is movement. And then helping people to come up with other ways to move, like crawl in the yard, play with your kids, go on a walk. Like, it doesn't have to just be, I hit the gym 5 days a week for an hour-long class. And like, I know I had a good workout because I want to vomit, or I'm really sore afterwards, So I think that a lot of people that end up with pelvic floor issues either have an extreme relationship with exercise, or they don't believe in themselves as an active person, and their pelvic floor issues can be related to sedentary habits too, where they don't use their body. So helping them see that movement and exercise is for us. And there are lots of different ways to go about it, but it's not about beating up on our body. You can only ask so much of your body based on what you're, depositing into the body. And most normal people they don't have like round the clock nutritionists. They don't have someone massaging them after every workout. Like, a lot of people model their relationship with exercise based on what they see like professional athletes doing, and that's what they expect. Or like an influencer who their whole job is to be like, I'm beautiful, and it's just like, they have a lot of time and money and resources to throw towards that. Do you? If not, then maybe like don't do a workout, take a nap, or go for a walk,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, was it? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think it was Kate that was saying you have to be able to trust your body as much as you trust it, or, you have to have that trusting relationship that you're going to treat yourself well, so it will treat you well.
And that's the other thing too. Like, I really I want to help people, and it helped me a lot to adopt the mindset, like, your body is wise. It's smart. It's compensating in these ways because it has to. It's trying to keep you alive, but it's not like dumb. It's not defective. If it's doing something that you don't like and is disagreeable, it's like, an injury or disease, you have to think about why and try to get to the root of it. And so cultivating respect for the body and trusting your innate wisdom that I think we are all born with. The body is very intelligent. It's very smart. If you look at anything in nature, you're like, wow, that's really complex. And you have a lot of different tools for navigating all the things that the world throws at you. Why would bodies be any different? So if you come at it from that perspective, I think then there's hope, because you're like, well, it's not cooperating right now, but there's a reason for it. If I resolve the problem, then I can probably see some improvement. And I have never seen that not to be the case. So that's the mindset, which is really long, but
it's so important.
Yeah, it is, right? And I think on the soul side, it's just like, do you believe that you're here for a purpose? Do you think that there's a purpose to your existence, to the things that happen to you? Are you here on this planet to serve other people, or is it just about you? Because if it's just about you all the time, and it's just about you getting what you want and feeling good, then it is easy to throw yourself a pity party when things don't go your way, because everything's supposed to go your way, right?
Right.
I don't think that. I think it's okay to have a pity party, but like pity benders is a problem, right? So I personally believe that I'm created by God with a purpose and fearfully and wonderfully made, and that he didn't make mistakes. And even in my prolapse development and my other health issues, that he uses them to help and encourage and reach other people so that they don't get lost in the mire of depression and anxiety that's associated with having your body disappoint you, you know, and withdrawing from your partner because you can't be intimate without feeling good, withdrawing from society because you're afraid you're going to pee your pants, things like that. So I think everyone needs to find their purpose and their spiritual connection and what they ultimately believe matters in life. And then that's going to help them. If they do some digging and they think getting to the gym 5 days a week or looking a certain way is the most important thing, then, you know, I guess that's their answer. But, you know, I think that we're not here by accident, right? We have a reason, and the way that we all connect and touch each other's lives, and, you know, there's a reason for that. And so even when things go wrong in the body, when we understand that it can be an opportunity for us to know ourselves better, to find inner strength and overcome, and then to also turn and use that to help other people and reevaluate what's the most important, I find that to be a way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm hearing you say is that we need to train different areas, not just our physical bodies, but also address the mind, our soul, purpose, our why, our reason for being, and also our heart. And it seems that the heart is maybe the root cause of some of our sticking points. So very important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you know, where your heart is, right? That's where, what is it? Was like, oh, have you ever heard that, the verse of like, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And it is what people value. That's where your heart is going to be. And I understand that there's a lot of reasons why people value things like physical ability and aesthetics and how we look in the community and everything. And that's not all bad. I think it's totally fine for people to have desires to look physically fit if they put a lot of work into being fit. And I understand a lot of people, when they get injured, they can't go to their gym anymore, and then they lose community connection. And that's really important to them. So I get that. But I think we always need to just be keeping things in check, because for me, when I developed pelvic organ prolapse, it was right on the cusp of when I was starting to get a little crazy about fitness, right on the cusp of thinking like, if I miss a workout, I'm going to lose my fitness, or, you know, or just like prioritizing my health and my fitness sometimes more than some of my responsibilities I had as a parent, you know. And I think there's a balance to that. But I said this on my show recently, like, my kids only exist because I made them. My husband and I made them. It's not their fault that they're here. So I have a responsibility to make sure. It's like, it's not like they're like, we want to be born. It's like, we want to have a good time. And oh, there you are. Like, you know, 10 months later, and that's not their fault. And so I owe them a lot. And I think you owe your kids to teach them good boundaries and to say no, and say, Mom needs to work out now. But I was right on the cusp of getting a little too like into fitness and into looks and everything. So I think it saved me from getting too obsessive, honestly. And so I think that it's important for people to sometimes see it like that maybe you weren't going in a good place, you know. A lot of things can go wrong when we're obsessed with things in life that ultimately are fleeting and don't really matter.
Yeah, and these things that happen to us, these warning signs, you know, they're a good indicator that we're going off track in some aspect of our life. We need to kind of bring it back around and focus on the important. You know, Kate, being mindful of your time. One thing I wanted to ask you though is, I think you offer several different types of support for people who are interested in strengthening their pelvic floor and dealing with dysfunction. Would you just walk us through what those are?
Sure. So if someone goes to dirtystrength.com, they can start with the free course, which is called Better Than Kegels. And that's breath work. And again, we've talked a lot about how fundamental that is. Even if you don't have pelvic floor issues, digestive issues, just difficulty like buying into the idea of diaphragmatic breathing and breathing through the nose, it's a good introduction to that for anyone. And like I said, it's a free digital course. And so then from there, all my programs are listed on that website. There's Hold Up, which is specifically for prolapse, Connect to Your Core and Pelvic Floor, which is for people with over recruitment, pelvic floor, like tight pelvic floor issues, and postpartum, anyone that's had a baby recently. And then people can also opt to work one-on-one with me. But I usually try and push them towards the digital courses first because I think it's the best bang for their buck to just be able to do a self-paced thing. And then also I have a lot of options in there because for some people, their big rock might be the movement mechanics, and they might not think that they need abdominal massage to help increase like lymph flow in the abdomen. So they'll start with the thing that they're like, yes, I believe in that. And then hopefully then they'll move and they'll try and they'll be like, I should try castor oil packs because I do have digestive issues. So, that kind of thing. So that's pretty much it. And you can find all that at dirtystrength.com. And then I give so much free information out via my podcast. There's so many pelvic floor episodes there. Like I've had people write to me and just be like, I'm all better now just from that or from the free breath course, because it can be as simple as a mindset shift and better breathing. It can be that simple. It doesn't, even though the pelvic floor is so complex, the solutions don't have to be that complicated. They can just be something that was staring you in the face that you didn't recognize it as such, So, and generally, if it's improving your quality of life and helping you to have a better sense of self and be in touch with your body, it's going to probably help your pelvic floor.
It's so beautiful how complicated and simple we are as humans.
I know, isn't it? It's kind of reassuring that you're like, I'm so complicated. I don't really understand it, but hey, I could just like start journaling and that's going to make things a lot better.
Right. Take a breath.
Now with the COVID restrictions being lifted or a little bit, are you working with groups again?
I give talks and I give talks generally. So, but I haven't really worked with any groups recently.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I like when I get invited to like gyms or whatever, but I've hosted them at my gym before, but I don't know. I'm in the process of making some big life changes. So I don't know if I'll be having any groups anytime soon, but we'll see.
All right. Just for, thank you. Just for personal curiosity, I saw a photo on your website when you were at REI.
Yes.
Which store was that?
Which store? It was in Cary in North Carolina. Cary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There was a cycling group that invited me to come and speak to them.
Oh, nice. Wonderful.
Yeah. I love giving talks. I've done them at CrossFit gyms. I've done it at other gyms. I love it because I just love telling people about it. It's so fun and interesting. And there's a lot of people that talk about the pelvic floor, but I think the holistic perspective and the personal experience of it too, I think really resonates with a lot of people. And I want people to know that it's more than just musculoskeletal stuff. So anytime I can get in front of an audience and tell them about it, I'm like, I'll do it.
Wonderful.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for your time. This has been just an incredible conversation. And I know I've learned so much just from talking to you. The research we've done is kind of mind-blowing, the importance of this topic, and so little that we hear about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's awesome. So thanks for being interested in the topic and for sharing it with your listeners.
You're very welcome. It was our pleasure.